Pelé grabbed the microphone and told 80,000 people in the Maracana that Diego Maradona couldn't play real football. Not a joke, not a backhanded compliment, a direct public dismissal of the most dangerous player alive, broadcast on live television, with Maradona watching from the tunnel less than 40 feet away. What happened in the next 90 minutes would become Buenos Aires legend, a story whispered about for decades in every barbershop, every taxi, every back alley bar from La Boca to Napoli. Now let me set this up properly, because this story has layers most people never hear about. It's 1979. Pelé has been retired for 2 years. He played his farewell match in New York, waved goodbye, and walked into the golden sunset that the world had prepared for him since he was 17 years old. 3 World Cups, over 1,000 goals. A man so famous that warring factions in Nigeria literally called a ceasefire so both sides could watch him play. That's not mythology. That actually happened. Pelé wasn't just a footballer. He was a global institution, and by 1979 he had settled comfortably into the role of football's supreme authority. When Pelé spoke, the sport listened. When Pelé ranked players, those rankings became gospel. And Pelé had opinions, strong ones, particularly about a short, stocky 18-year-old from a Buenos Aires slum named Diego Armando Maradona. Believe me, Pelé did not like what he saw in Maradona. Not the talent. Nobody could deny the talent. By 18, Maradona was already doing things with a football that made veteran defenders look like traffic cones. He had this low center of gravity, these thick legs that churned underneath him, and a left foot that seemed to operate on a different frequency than every other foot in professional sport. He'd been a child prodigy, debuting in the Argentine First Division at 15, becoming the youngest player to ever appear in the league. At 16, he earned his first cap for the national team. The kid was a hurricane, but Pelé had a problem with him. Multiple problems, actually. The first was style. Pelé believed in the beautiful game, elegant, flowing, team-oriented. Maradona played football the way a street fighter throws punches. Chaotic, individual, sometimes selfish. He'd pick up the ball in his own half and dribble past 6 players not because it was the smartest option, but because he could, because he wanted to prove something every single time he touched the ball. Pelé thought that was wasteful, immature. He said it publicly. The second problem was attitude. Maradona came from Villa Fiorito, one of the poorest neighborhoods in Buenos Aires. He had dirt floors growing up, literally dirt floors, and he carried that chip on his shoulder everywhere. He was loud, he was confrontational, he challenged authority. He told reporters exactly what he thought about anyone who questioned him. Pelé believed champions carried themselves with dignity. Maradona believed champions carried themselves however they wanted because they earned it. And the third problem, the one nobody talked about openly but everyone understood, was legacy. Pelé was the king. He had been the king since 1958, 21 years on the throne, unchallenged, and now here came this kid from the mud, this raw, unpolished force of nature, and the football world was starting to ask a question that made Pelé's jaw tighten every time he heard it. Could Maradona be better than Pelé? Here's what nobody tells you. The 1979 match wasn't supposed to be a confrontation. It was supposed to be a celebration, a friendly between a Brazilian all-star team and an Argentine all-star team at the Maracana in Rio de Janeiro. Pelé wasn't playing. He was retired. He was there as an honorary guest, invited to address the crowd before kickoff, to say a few words about football and brotherhood and all the warm things you say at friendly matches. 80,000 fans packed that stadium to see football and to see their king one more time. Maradona was on the Argentine squad. This was a big deal. He'd been controversially left off the 1978 World Cup roster. Argentina's coach, Cesar Luis Menotti, had cut him from the squad just before the tournament. Argentina went on to win the World Cup without him. On home soil, the greatest achievement in Argentine football history, and the most talented player in the country watched it on television. That wound was still fresh. Maradona had something to prove to everyone, to Menotti, to Argentina, to the world. And then Pelé walked to center field with a microphone. The crowd went crazy, 80,000 Brazilians on their feet chanting his name. Pelé waved. He thanked them. He talked about the spirit of the game, The bond between Brazil and Argentina, the usual diplomatic pleasantries. And then, I swear this happened. A reporter near the tunnel caught what came next on tape. Pelé pivoted. He started talking about the future of football. He mentioned several young Brazilian players by name, praising their skill, their potential. And then someone in the crowd shouted Maradona's name. There was a cheer from the Argentine fans scattered through the stadium. Pelé paused. He looked toward the tunnel where the Argentine team was waiting to come out, and he said, in Portuguese, clear enough for every microphone to capture, that Maradona was a talented boy but he couldn't play real football, that he was a product of hype, that he lacked the discipline and the vision to ever be considered among the truly great players, that Argentina had won the World Cup without him, and that told you everything you needed to know. The Brazilian crowd loved it. 80,000 people roaring approval. This was their king confirming what they wanted to believe. Brazilian football was superior, always had been, always would be. In the tunnel, Diego Maradona heard every word. Now picture this. You're 18 years old. You come from nothing. You've been told your entire life that you're not enough, not big enough, not disciplined enough, not worthy of the biggest stage. Your own country left you off the World Cup team. And now, the most famous footballer who ever lived just told 80,000 people that you can't play. Get this, Maradona didn't say a word. The Argentine players around him were furious. Some were shouting back toward the field. Veteran players were cursing in Spanish, calling it disrespectful. But Maradona went quiet, dead quiet. His teammate Osvaldo Ardiles, who was standing right next to him, said later that Maradona's face changed completely. Not anger exactly, something colder. Maradona reached down, picked up a football that was sitting near the tunnel entrance, and started bouncing it on his left foot. Slowly, rhythmically, over and over. His eyes were fixed on the light at the end of the tunnel where the pitch was waiting. One of the Argentine coaches walked over and said something about staying focused, about not letting it get personal. Maradona didn't look at him, just kept bouncing the ball. Left foot, left foot, left foot. The coach stepped back. The teams came out onto the field. The Maracana was electric. Brazilian fans dominant, flags everywhere, drums pounding. The Argentine players looked tense. This was hostile territory and they'd just been publicly insulted by a living god. But Maradona walked out last. He came through the tunnel and stepped onto the grass and he looked up at those 80,000 people and his face showed absolutely nothing. Blank, controlled, like a man who had already decided what was going to happen and was just waiting for the referee to start the clock. The whistle blew. And for the first 15 minutes, Maradona did something nobody expected. He disappeared. Seriously. He barely touched the ball. He drifted to the left wing, stayed quiet, made simple passes. The Brazilian all-stars controlled possession. Zico, the Brazilian star, was running the show, spraying passes around the field, looking every bit the heir to Pelé's throne. The crowd was celebrating. This was exactly what Pelé had promised. Argentine football, and Maradona specifically, couldn't compete with Brazilian quality. Pelé was sitting in a very important person section near midfield. He was nodding, talking to people around him, comfortable, validated, and then the 16th minute arrived. Trust me on this. Maradona received the ball near the halfway line, slightly to the left. A Brazilian defender closed him down immediately. Hard challenge, the kind of tackle that's meant to send a message. Maradona didn't try to dribble. He didn't try anything fancy. He laid the ball off to a teammate and sprinted forward. The Brazilian defender watched the ball go and lost track of Maradona for exactly 2 seconds. That was enough. Maradona found space between two defenders, received the return pass at full speed, and unleashed a shot from 25 yards that bent into the top corner of the net before the goalkeeper even moved his feet. The Argentine section of the crowd exploded. The Brazilian majority fell silent. 80,000 people, and you could hear the Buenos Aires contingent like they were the only ones in the building. Maradona didn't celebrate wildly. He turned and looked directly at the very important person section, directly at where Pelé was sitting. He didn't point, he didn't shout, he just looked. And then he jogged back to his half. Pelé shifted in his seat. His expression didn't change much, but his hand came up to his chin and stayed there. Now here's where this story goes from impressive to legendary. The Brazilians equalized within 5 minutes. Zico, Because of course it was Zico, scored a beautiful team goal. The Maracana erupted again. Order restored. The king's prophecy was back on track. One flash of brilliance from Maradona didn't change the fundamental truth. Right? Wrong. So wrong. From the restart, Maradona demanded the ball. And when I say demanded, I mean he was screaming at his teammates, pointing to his feet, clapping his hands. This wasn't the quiet ghost who drifted through the first 15 minutes. This was a different person entirely. Something had switched on inside him, and it was not switching off. He picked up the ball in his own half again. Two Brazilian defenders stepped up to press him. Maradona dropped his shoulder left, went right, accelerated past both of them so fast that one of them actually stumbled into the other. The crowd made a noise that wasn't cheering and wasn't booing. It was shock, pure involuntary shock. Because what Maradona did next was physically unreasonable. He kept going. A third defender came across to cover. Maradona pushed the ball through his legs, without breaking stride. The defender spun around and Maradona was already 5 yards past him, bearing down on the goalkeeper. He didn't shoot. He looked up, saw an Argentine teammate arriving at the back post, and delivered a pass so precise that the teammate just had to redirect it into the empty net. 2-1, Argentina. And this is what I need you to understand. This wasn't a normal friendly anymore. The temperature in that stadium shifted completely. The Brazilians in the crowd were getting uncomfortable. Pelé was leaning forward. The Brazilian all-stars were starting to foul Maradona. Hard fouls, tactical fouls, the kind of fouls that leave bruises for weeks. And Maradona took every single one of them and got up every single time without complaint. No rolling around, no pleading with the referee. He'd just pick himself up, wipe the grass off his shorts, and go find the ball again. This is the part people forget when they talk about Maradona. Everyone remembers the goals, the dribbles, the hand of God, all of it. But the toughness. This kid took punishment that would have hospitalized most players, and he kept coming back for more. Villa Fiorito didn't raise soft men. You don't grow up on dirt floors and crumble because someone kicks your ankles. Let me tell you what happened in the 38th minute, because this is the moment that made this match immortal. Maradona collected the ball just inside the Brazilian half. He was surrounded. 3 defenders within touching distance. The Brazilian defensive midfielder grabbed his shirt, literally grabbed a fistful of his jersey and pulled. Maradona didn't go down. He twisted, ripping his shirt free, losing half a step. The defensive midfielder stuck out a leg. Maradona hurdled it, still on the ball, still moving forward. A center back came in from the side with a sliding tackle. Maradona jumped over it, the ball squirted forward, and Maradona chased it down, beating the last defender to it by an inch. He was one-on-one with the goalkeeper now. The Maracana was holding its breath, every voice frozen. Maradona shifted right, the goalkeeper committed, and Maradona rolled the ball into the net with the outside of his left foot while falling sideways from the momentum of the dribble. He hit the ground, slid across the wet grass, and ended up on his back staring at the Rio de Janeiro sky. His teammates piled on top of him, 3-1. Now, I want you to hold that image in your mind. An 18-year-old kid lying on the grass of the Maracana after scoring one of the most extraordinary individual goals anyone in that stadium had ever witnessed. And somewhere in the very important person section, the man who told 80,000 people this kid couldn't play football is watching with his hand still on his chin and his mouth slightly open. And we're not done. We are not even close to done. The second half started, and the Brazilians came out with fury. This was no longer a friendly. This was national pride at war. Zico scored again early in the second half, 3-2. The Maracana found its voice again. The momentum was shifting. Brazilian pressure was relentless, wave after wave of attack. The Argentine defense was cracking. You could feel the equalizer coming. And Maradona? He dropped deep. He started defending. An 18-year-old number 10, the most naturally gifted attacking player on the field, started tracking back and making tackles. Not because his coach told him to. Because he wasn't going to let this game slip away. Not this game. Not tonight. He made a tackle on the edge of his own box that was so clean, so perfectly timed, that even the Brazilian fans had to acknowledge it. He won the ball, looked up, and played a 60-yard pass over the top of the entire Brazilian defense to an Argentine striker who was offside by a step. Didn't matter. The pass itself was a statement. Maradona was telling everyone in that stadium that he could do everything: defend, create, score, lead. Whatever the game demanded, he would provide. Can you feel this thing building? Because it built even further. Around the 65th minute, Maradona did something that still gets debated in football circles to this day. He received the ball on the left touchline, near the corner flag. Dead-end position, nowhere to go. Two defenders boxing him in. The smart play, the Pelé play, would have been to pass backward, reset the attack, keep possession. Maradona didn't do the smart thing. He did the Maradona thing. He flicked the ball up with his left foot. In a match, in front of 80,000 people, he flicked it up and juggled it. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he knocked it over the head of the first defender, spun around him, collected the ball on the other side, and dribbled past the second defender before crossing the ball into the box. The cross didn't result in a goal, but it didn't need to. The damage was psychological. He was humiliating them now, and he was doing it with joy. For the first time all night, Maradona was grinning, not a polite smile, a wild, defiant, feral grin, the grin of a kid who grew up on dirt floors and was now dancing on the most famous grass in world football. Now listen to me carefully, because this is the turning point. Around the 75th minute, the match still 3-2, the Maracana still rocking, something unusual happened. There was a stoppage in play. A Brazilian player was down injured. During the break, cameras caught Pelé standing up in the very important person section. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't angry. He was standing perfectly still, watching Maradona on the field below. And Maradona, who had been stretching near the center circle, looked up and saw him. Their eyes met. 18 years old and 39 years old, the future and the past, the kid from the mud and the king from the clouds. Nobody heard what happened next because it wasn't spoken, but multiple witnesses in the VIP section reported the same thing. Pelé nodded, a single, almost imperceptible nod, and then he sat down. That nod was worth more than every word he'd spoken into the microphone before the match, because Pelé knew. He knew right then. He'd been wrong. Not about the discipline, not about the style, not about any of the technical criticisms he'd leveled at Maradona over the years. He'd been wrong about the conclusion. He'd looked at everything Maradona wasn't and failed to see what Maradona was. What Maradona was, on that night, was the most compelling footballer on planet Earth. Not the most elegant, not the most tactical, not the most efficient. The most compelling, the one you couldn't look away from. The one who turned a friendly match into a war and then turned that war into art. The match ended 3-2. Argentina won. Now here's the part that makes me tell this story every chance I get. After the final whistle, the players shook hands. Normal post-match stuff. The Argentine team was celebrating, the Brazilians were frustrated, the crowd was filing out. But Maradona didn't go to the locker room. He walked across the field toward the very important person section. Not running, walking, slowly. His shirt was ripped from where it had been grabbed in the first half. His socks were around his ankles, grass stains everywhere. He looked exhausted and victorious, and very, very young. He stopped below the very important person railing and looked up. Pelé was still there, hadn't left. The two of them stood there for a moment, separated by about 10 feet of concrete and about 20 years of history. And then Pelé did something that stunned every person who saw it. He climbed down from the very important person section. The great Pelé, in his tailored suit, climbed over a railing and dropped down to field level. Security moved toward him, but he waved them off. He walked directly to Maradona. The cameras were catching all of this. Live television, the whole country watching. Pelé extended his hand. Maradona took it. And Pelé leaned in and said something into Maradona's ear. Only Maradona heard it. He never revealed the exact words. Not once in his entire life. Reporters asked him hundreds of times over the decades, "What did Pelé say to you that night at the Maracana?" And Maradona would always give the same answer. He'd shake his head and he'd say, "That's between me and him." But here's what Maradona did say publicly years later in an interview that most English-speaking fans have never seen. He said that when Pelé grabbed the microphone before that match and told the world he couldn't play, it was the greatest gift anyone ever gave him. He said that everything he became, everything he achieved, every World Cup goal, every impossible dribble, every moment of genius on a football pitch was fueled by that night. by a man standing at center field telling him he wasn't good enough. Maradona said, "He gave me my fire." If you've been following this story and you want more moments of pure sporting mythology, hit that subscribe button right now. One click. You won't miss another story told the way it deserves to be told. Now let me bring this home, because the legend didn't end on that field. It rippled forward through time. 5 years later, Maradona moved to Napoli, a struggling club in southern Italy that hadn't won a major trophy in decades. He dragged them to 2 Serie A titles. He made them champions. He made an entire city fall in love with football again. The kid who couldn't play. In 1986, at the World Cup in Mexico, Maradona put Argentina on his back and carried them to the trophy. Against England in the quarterfinal, he scored 2 goals. The first was the infamous hand of God, controversial, illegal, pure Maradona. The second was the goal of the century. He picked the ball up in his own half and dribbled past 5 English players and the goalkeeper. It is, by near universal consensus, the greatest individual goal ever scored in the history of football. Not the most important, not the most dramatic, the greatest. A man alone against 11, and the 11 lost. And where was Pelé during all of this? He was watching. He was always watching. And to his credit, a thing that often gets lost in this rivalry, Pelé evolved. He didn't stay stuck in 1979. By the mid-1980s, Pelé was publicly acknowledging Maradona's genius, not always graciously, not without qualifications and caveats and the occasional backhanded remark. But he acknowledged it, because he had to, because what Maradona did on football pitches throughout the 1980s was undeniable. Mark this down. In 1987, after Napoli won their first ever Serie A title, a reporter asked Pelé the direct question, "Is Maradona the best player in the world right now?" Pelé paused, a long pause, and then he said yes. One word, no qualifications. Yes. That yes cost him something. You could see it in his face. Pelé had been the best player in the world for the better part of 2 decades, admitting that someone else held that title, especially someone whose style he'd publicly criticized, someone he'd tried to diminish in front of 80,000 people. That took something from him that he couldn't get back, but he said it anyway. And that's the moment of vulnerability in this story that most people miss. Pelé wasn't a villain. He was a man watching his throne being taken and struggling with the most human emotion there is, the fear of being replaced. And Maradona understood that. Despite everything, despite the public insults, despite the rivalry, despite decades of back and forth in the press, Maradona always spoke about Pelé with a specific kind of respect. Not reverence, respect. He never tried to diminish Pelé's legacy. He never said he was better than Pelé. He said they were different. He was the king of his era, Maradona once said. I was the king of mine. Take that in for a second. 2 men, 2 eras, 2 completely different versions of football greatness. One built on elegance and team harmony, the other built on individual brilliance and sheer force of will. And the football world has spent 40+ years arguing about which version was superior, never reaching a conclusion, because the question itself might be unanswerable. But here's what I know for certain. On that night in 1979, in the Maracana, in front of 80,000 people, a king tried to kill a legend before it was born. He grabbed a microphone and used his authority and his fame and his voice to tell the world that this kid from the slums wasn't worth their attention. And that kid heard every word, and he walked onto that field and he didn't argue, he didn't complain, he didn't plead his case. He played. He played so brilliantly, so ferociously, so completely, that the king himself climbed down from his throne, walked across the grass, and shook his hand. He gave me my fire. That's what Maradona said. 5 words. And those 5 words explain everything that came after, every goal, every trophy, every moment of madness and beauty. It all traces back to one night in Rio when a boy was told he couldn't, and he showed 80,000 people that he could. There's a bar in La Boca, in Buenos Aires, where they have a photograph on the wall. It's grainy, black and white, clearly taken from a television screen. It shows Pelé and Maradona on the pitch at the Maracana, face to face, Pelé's hand extended, Maradona reaching for it. Below the photograph, someone has written in black marker, in Spanish, a single line. It translates roughly to, The night the prince became the king. I've been to that bar, I've seen that photograph, and I'm telling you, every single person in that neighborhood has a version of this story. The details change, the number of goals changes, the timeline shifts depending on who's had how many drinks, but the core never changes. Pelé said Maradona couldn't play, and Maradona played the game of his life. You want to know the final detail? The one that still gets me every time? Years later, long after both men had retired, long after the rivalry had softened into something closer to mutual admiration, Pelé was asked in a television interview about his greatest regret. He listed a few things: leaving Santos earlier than he should have, not playing in one more World Cup, missing time with his family. And then he paused, that same long pause, and he said quietly, almost to himself, "I should not have said what I said about Diego before that match in Rio." The interviewer pressed him. "Why?" And Pelé looked directly into the camera and said, "Because I created my own problem." He didn't say enemy, he didn't say rival, he said problem. And the way he said it, you could tell he meant it as a compliment. The highest compliment he was capable of giving. I made this kid angry, and that anger turned him into the most dangerous player I ever saw. They're both gone now. Pelé passed in December 2022. Maradona left us in November 2020. The two greatest footballers of the 20th century, separated by style, by era, by temperament, by everything except the one thing that actually matters. They both loved the game more than they loved being comfortable. They both burned for it. And on one night in 1979, that burning collided in a way that shaped football forever. The Maracana is still standing. The very important person section where Pelé sat has been renovated 3 times since then. The tunnel where Maradona bounced that ball on his left foot has been rebuilt. The grass has been replaced hundreds of times. Physically, nothing remains from that night. But the story remains, and the story is everything. Pelé told 80,000 fans that Maradona couldn't play football, and what Maradona did next became the kind of legend that doesn't need proof. It doesn't need video. It doesn't need statistics or analysis or expert commentary. It lives in the telling, in the bar in La Boca with the photograph on the wall, in the memories of the fans who were there, in the quiet nod from a king who realized, too late, that he'd just woken up something he couldn't control. Maradona couldn't play football. Sure, and the ocean is just a puddle. He gave me my fire. That's the whole story. That's the legend. And legends, once they're born, don't die. They just get louder.